One.
Welcome to the reality show, day 147 of the war in Israel. So later on in the show, we're going to talk about that incident that happened yesterday where people in Gaza were trying to get to humanitarian aid and many of them died. What exactly happened? We don't know. We'll talk about it later. I think it kind of ties into the main topic that we have. At least some of what we hear about it ties to the main topic, which is Israel's disillusioned left. So people after October 7th, many people on the left um, changed their minds, or at least claim that they do, and we're gonna discuss that. Right now, I have my own views about them. It's not as positive as you might think. I'm joined by Morgan, who I was just joined with on the Daily Objective. I think on the Daily Objective, I offended English people, Arabic people, and women. Let's see who's left to offend on this show. Jonathan, hopefully I didn't offend you on that show, but who knows what's coming here. And Nathan, it's been a while. Welcome back. I try not to offend people when they come back. I try to give it an episode or two. Nathan, I'm going to start with you because you are in Israel.
Don't be gentle on me.
I'm not going to be gentle on the left, by the way, but I want to hear what you have to say about them and about those who are leaving the left in Israel.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit mixed about this subject because, I mean, what is it that they are sobering up about? So, in my view, so that they thought that, the Palestinians, they're just, I don't know, there's just, they resort to terrorism because, I don't know, they don't have um, enough material wealth, and we just need to, you know, put in a better infrastructure, and we need to put in, all the institutions, and we'll bring in democracy, and I don't know, they'll have nicer clothes, and they'll have good jobs, and better toilets in the homes, and then they'll want peace because they're just like everybody else. Everybody, we're all just one big happy family. Um, and that's it. So that's really kind of that's the naive kind of idea that they had embraced for many years. I mean, okay, so maybe the more sinister or malicious part of the left was doing it for more kind of self-sacrificial, altruistic, nihilist motives. But I think for most of the left, maybe that was kind of their just general ideas about this subject. But so now they're like, okay, no, these people living there, they don't actually want to make peace, and they don't actually like us that much, and they now understand that you can't just talk with people who have totalitarian Islamist insane violent ideas. You just cannot negotiate with them, and there's nothing that will come good of it. So I mean, reality in this case, it makes people come to terms with the facts, and in that sense, it's good. So they're now more aligned with reality. They correspond to reality better. But in order to really get deep into this into this conflict, to understand the kind of deep fundamental causes of the war, of the conflict, of how we're going to solve it, you have to have good philosophy. You have to have, I would argue, the ideas of Ayn Rand and of objectivism, so you can really look into what's going on and say, look, they don't believe in individual rights. Israel is more a Western civilization, Western country that does protect individual rights, not perfectly. We've talked about this many times, but it does. So that's why Israel is on the good side of history, and the Palestinians are on the bad side. And until they understand that, until they, get that, and until they, so this is a kind of a second topic. Why I'm mixed about this, because if you talk to the right wing Israelis, so okay, so like the right wing has been in power for ages, right? I mean, they've been there for like 2 decades now in power, and what did they do? They didn't do nothing. In October 7, is the outcome of the right, of the Israeli right. So if you move from the left to the Israeli right, it doesn't mean that you're going to actually come up with the solutions. And so that's what I'm saying. You do need the more comprehensive philosophy to guide you in this conflict, because otherwise you're just going to go to the right, which is kind of a more, I mean, they're both cynical, right? But the right is actually, I just talked with a few right-wing colleagues of mine at work, and I asked them, do you think Israel is going to win this war? And they're like, no, no way. So I mean, so if they move from the left to the right and they're still thinking like, no, we can't win this, so we've advanced a little bit, like, so there is like an incremental small step towards the right path, but it's not enough.
Jonathan, what do you think about this movement of the left, or their disillusionment with their ideas and how they turned out in reality?
I was always told that there was no left wing in Israel, that everyone in effect was right wing in Israel. So some of this is news to me. And obviously, as an American, I'm really at a loss for kind of necessarily which way the political winds are blowing in Israel. But I do remember after 9/11, a great patriotism among Americans who really put down their political divide for a moment. And I think a real shared sense of wanting a vengeance back then. I mean, we had seen this terrible massacre, buildings come crashing down of truly innocent people. And I think there was, a real appropriate sense of wanting to find the perpetrators and smite them from the earth. I have such empathy for Natan and for all of Israel. It's so easy to sit here in America and say, oh, here's how they should feel, here's how they should think. But, your whole life has been turned upside down. Think about that to our viewers. Like, it's not like, oh, this is something new that just came up on TV in Israel, or, there's a new pop star. This is their whole lives turned upside down. It is 100% Hamas's fault. And while, I do think the role of government is to eliminate threats like this, completely render them innocuous, I have great empathy because it's like your daughter or your son or your father that's actually going out to do the fighting. So my heart goes out to Israel. I think Hamas should be eradicated from the earth. But when you're in the middle of it, I can understand how politics and, Natan, to your point, philosophy can blow you either way.
Morgan, your thoughts on what you know of the Israeli left and their recent shift, at least among some of them?
Yeah, I mean, so this was something that I was reading about back when we were talking about Tal Mitnick, because he was kind of asked about the sobering up phenomena and what he made of it, and he was rejecting it. But it was something that Jonathan kind of spoke about, and it was this idea that kind of, especially, I guess, young people, but people on the left had seen the error of their ways in the light of October 7th. And broadly, I'd want to say that that's a positive thing. I'd kind of maybe just echo what's already been said. Rand has a comment somewhere, I think it's about Pearl Harbor or something, where after Pearl Harbor, she said there was a swing amongst Americans to the right or something like that. And she described it as kind of psychologically healthy, because it was a kind of, you've been attacked and you're going to swing towards national self-assertion, something kind of like that. And I think that's perhaps what you're seeing going on there. My questions about it, and maybe Razi or Natan, you'd have an insight into this. It isn't like this is the first time that Israel's been attacked by Hamas. So why is it this time? Is it because October 7th was just so horrific? Or why didn't they sober up in 2021 or any of these other times? That would be the thing that I would wonder about, because what I'm wondering about is, I guess the idea would be that the reality has pushed its way through their illusions and the ideas which are getting in the way of them comprehending the reality. But why didn't that happen before? That would be what I would wonder. And I wonder if you guys have any insight into that.
So we might have, actually, Daniel, do we have that video ready? If we do, I think that gives an insight, although I have a lot to say about it as well. But if we have that video, Daniel, can you please play it? And if not, all right, there it is.
Roll the clip.
Palestinians took all the bodies they could. The only bodies we found were in the burned houses, and some of the bodies had no heads. They cut the heads and took the heads with them. So I think to myself, what kind of human being would want to take somebody's head and what? Keep it in the living room? Are these the people I supported? Are these the people that I wanted to help? Are these are people who want peace, prosperity, want a beautiful garden? So it's very heartbreaking to think that these actions are so non-human, below any moral behavior that one could expect from anybody, even if it's your enemy.
So, Morgan, I don't know if I think that answers your question. It is because it was so horrific. It is because, yesterday there was a terrorist attack in Israel. Two 16-year-olds were murdered, and that's not horrific enough. Going there and seeing what exactly it was that they did on October 7th is a kind of wake-up call, which is why I have trouble buying this from the Israeli left. Again, people make mistakes, have errors in their thinking, and we have free will. We can choose to start to think, and unless we did anything horrific, we can be forgiven, and that happens. But Willful Thinker said earlier in the chat, the sad irony is that many of those disillusioned lost their lives on October 7th. Yes, this was the last moments of people's lives we talked about this in the episode of the Daily Objective, the Palestinian way. Like the most horrible things imaginable was what people went through right before they were murdered. And so many of these people were in the kibbutzim, which are left wing. They're left wing completely. It's not like a politically diverse type of you go there because you hold those views. We talked about the woman who was murdered on October 7th. First, they thought that she was kidnapped, and then they heard that she was murdered. She was 85 years old. I don't remember her name, but she was a member of the board of directors of B'Tselem. They call themselves the Israeli Human Rights Organization for the occupied territories, something like that. They are an anti-Israel organization in Israel, and she, lived her values and was murdered by her values. So, I mean, I see people who look at it, and because it's so horrific, they are now disillusioned. And I think you didn't know, you didn't know before that, because they've been telling us all along. When you've been telling us that it's the occupation and that we need to make concessions and we need to give them territory and we need to give them aid and whatever, and we need to remove the settlements because the settlements are the biggest obstacle to peace. These were the people you were siding with the whole time. So that's why I don't buy it.
And I'll just say, it reminds me so much of, and Tan, again, to what you said, like the importance of basic fundamental ideas. Rand alluded to this in the interview with Phil Donahue about why one should support Israel. I mean, on Israel's side, there's prosperity, there's technology, there's innovation, there's a celebration and protection and value of life. And on Hamas side, on the Palestinian side, there's exactly the opposite, as evidenced, by October 7th and so many other examples. So, you go back to those basic fundamental ideas, and that explains, in my opinion, the actions that follow.
Yes. I mean, I agree with Razi. I think, Israel, if you don't know, Israel is a very, I suppose, sociological country, meaning it is divided into these groups, be it, ethnicity or religion or whatever. So the fact that this attack was on the kind of Israel's left-wing sector, that had a major role in this. I mean, it's kind of sad to say, but if this attack been perpetrated on, the Israeli settlers, it may have not actually shifted the thinking of the left, because I think they would have seen it as an attack against the occupiers, or they would have had some sort of rationalization to kind of I mean, they would not have sided with the Palestinians, but I don't know if it would have caused such a major shift. And I think the fact that the Palestinians attacked the very people they supported the disengagement in 2005. They were active. They were activists for peace, and so this was like an attack right on that the core base of the Israeli left. And yeah, I think the fact that it was so horrific. I mean, we have historical records of the barbarity of the Arabs since. I mean, I remember reading about the riots in 1929. Okay, 1929. They used the same methods. I mean, they cut heads. I mean, I'm not gonna go into everything that they did there, but they did the same thing. And they always, I mean, when they had the chance to be barbaric like that, if Israelis cannot defend themselves, then they would act in this really barbaric, just I don't know even if the savages of the primordial ages, acted this way, but
right. And Natan, like to Rand's point, how can you answer that force but with force? Can you sit there and say, hey, Islamists, terrorists, let's really talk about this. What's in your rational self-interest? By that time, they've already fucking skinned you alive.
Yeah. And just to finish the point, so whenever they were barbaric, it was not in that scope. It was not such a magnitude of 1,200 people just butchered like that. So I think that the magnitude of October 7 and the fact that it was the attack was on the Israeli left, I think that was kind of a major shocker and reason to wake up.
Yeah, Ram mentions in the chat actually to your point, Nathan. He says, yeah, it also has to do with tribal thinking. It happened to your group, to people who are similar to you. Yeah, that is
sure.
Your point. Very good point about the settlements. I don't think the left would have reacted the same way. They would have said it's horrific, but as does, by the way, as does some of the left. In the book Price's Primary, Jonathan Hoenig says recommends to not double down, but some of the Israeli left has absolutely doubled down on their anti-Israel rhetoric. They are blaming Israel. There's less of the use of the word genocide among the Israeli pro-Palestinian left as there is elsewhere, but it exists. And of course, we spoke about this movie that's coming up, and the guy who made the speech in Berlin. So yeah, there's elements of that, but
they have Haaretz. I think Haaretz is like their last fortified force power.
Yeah, Haaretz is a newspaper, a broadsheet as we call it. It's still a broadsheet, right? They haven't.
They still print them. Yeah.
Yeah, but still in those really difficult to hold. Yeah.
I don't read Haaretz, so I wouldn't know.
Well, I'd say you're missing out, but we can hear it. You can see some Haaretz ideas in the chat by people who would probably like to see the people writing in Haaretz murdered. Morgan.
I was going to ask you about Haaretz actually, because I get from October 7th, I subscribed to all these newsletters from Israeli media sources, and I get one from Haaretz, and they're interestingly sort of resistant to this idea of sobering up. My impression, are they kind of like Israel's New York Times? Because I'm kind of reading them. That's my understanding. Would that be fair enough?
Yeah.
Might be a little unfair to the New York Times, although I don't want to defend the New York Times, but I think of them more as the Guardian.
Okay.
Because the Guardian is worse.
Yeah, that's better.
Sure. Okay. And then on the people on the left, in terms of judging them, and in terms of judging this lady who's in the video, what I would want to do is see how they react once the war is finished. So there's been this phenomena of sobering up. Do they change their ideas? And that's what you were really getting at, Natan, as well, that the importance of ideas here. And even though ideas are more fundamental than particular concrete events in the world, sometimes people can be so shocked by a particular thing they come across that they go back and reevaluate their ideas right down to the core. And various people coming from various schools of thought throughout history have done that. People who went and saw the French Revolution, people who saw the Paris riots in 1968 and so on, went and were so shocked by things that they went and changed their whole worldview. And if they do that, then I think I would judge these people fairly positively because they've really taken this seriously, thought, how could I have been so mistaken as to be supporting these people who've done such a horrific thing? And in a sense, by doing so, I've given succor and credence to these people and therefore indirectly enabled this thing to happen. And if they do that, then I think they're fundamentally good people who were, maybe doing some immoral things and maybe mistaken, but I would judge them, I guess, positively. But if they don't, if this basically happens and then they don't reevaluate and they swing back to their standard opinions and they kind of undermine Israel's efforts on the world stage, then these people are evil.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think, all of us here at some point have reevaluated our ideas to the core and changed them. I think much of the disillusioned left are people who were on the left because, look, the Palestinians are suffering and the settlers are mean, and then they saw October 7th and that was horrific, and now they're seeing Palestinians suffer. So who knows where they are? I mentioned on a different podcast that I saw shortly after October 7th, Yariv Oppenheimer, our viewers probably don't know who that is, but he runs this organization called Shalom Achshav, which translates to peace now, although I have said in the past I'd like to translate it to peace in our time, because I think it's more appropriate. And he said obviously Hamas needs to be destroyed. I don't know where he stands now. I'm not following him too closely, but I would be surprised if he's advocating for some sort of operation in Rafah. If he is, great.
No, he's one of Israel's biggest trolls. Like anything that's bad, he'll support what's bad. I mean, this guy's like, he has no shame. And he's also just not very smart. And I could be more,
yeah, go ahead.
Not so nice, but not so charitable. But let's just leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, but I think he probably fits in that group of people who, yeah, after October 7th, were kind of right wing for a few days. Right wing actually, this brings me to Bonnie's super chat. Thank you, Bonnie. Bonnie asks, what characterizes the right in Israel? So it's as difficult in Israel as it is elsewhere to actually say what right and left is, and that they really don't have any meaning. I think. As a kid growing up, as a left-wing kid, I always thought, okay, the left is the side that supports peace, the right is the side that supports war. Later on, I grew up and kind of started thinking about this a bit more. But yeah, it is mostly that. It's less economic issues, although maybe there's a bit more of that now. But it's mostly, are you for a concessions towards the Palestinians, or are you for not seeing them as partners for peace at the moment? Nathan, is that a fair?
Yeah, I think so. I actually have a poll that was released, I think 10 days ago or something. I don't know if you'd be interested to hear. It's kind of interesting to see how the differences between the right, center, and left.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's dig into it. So yeah, this was 10 days ago. Some Israeli organization held a survey, and so the first question was, what are the chances for total victory in the war in Gaza? And this was kind of an interesting result. So a total of 55% of all questionnaires said that the chances are pretty low or very low. And then only 39% said that the chances are very high, okay, or pretty much high. So you have most Israelis saying that chances are low to actually achieve victory. I think that's an interesting result. And then the other questions, they divide them to right, center, and left. So this next question is about sending aid into Gaza. And so, okay, so this will be like a very apparent differences between the right and the left. So the right says 80% is against sending aid into Gaza, and the left has 39%, only 39% that is against sending aid. And the center is 51% against sending aid in. And then they asked about the conflict in the north. What should Israel do? So, oh, sorry, just okay. So from the right, you have 65% saying that Israel should go to total war. Okay, 65, which I personally think that's pretty high. And then the center is only 40%. That's pro total war, and then the left is 28%. 28%. Now, they asked also, okay, this is nuts. So it's such an interesting question. Okay, so this is about forming a Palestinian state. So of the right, you have a whopping 78% that is against a Palestinian state. And by the way, the question is a Palestinian state that's disarmed, so they won't have any weapons. But still, the right is 78% against. The center is 48% against, and the left is 20% against, 77% supporting a Palestinian state.
Yeah, by the way, a state that is disarmed is a beautiful idea. You know how they enforce it in the same way that Israel enforced after the disengagement, after Israel left Gaza. They said, we're going to leave Gaza, but if one rocket is fired from Gaza, we're going to go all in, and they did eventually go all in, but it was more than one rocket that took us to get to that point.
Yeah. So just last question, and then I'll ask you your opinions about it. So this is about, kind of stopping the war and cutting some diplomatic solution. So the right is 69% against. The center is 37% against. So, or I should say, the center is 56% for a diplomatic solution, and the left is 74% for a diplomatic solution. So, I mean, you see the big differences there between the right and the left, but I wonder what you think about this poll.
Jonathan,
Catching you by surprise.
I mean, again, as an outside observer, somebody who's really not fluent in Israeli politics, but listening to comparing the headlines and the political statements, it's all just such this philosophical mishmash of altruism and nationalism and patriotism, but faux patriotism, and maybe a little bit of individualism, but it's so muddied, and it must be so frustrating as an Israeli. I guess my hope would be that same transformation that you're describing, that maybe this massacre is having on people on the left. I mean, ultimately, isn't that what war is? Is that we want the Palestinians to have that transformation. We want them not to want a Palestinian state. They want to have nothing to do with any traditions or histories of, we want to change ultimately their way of thinking about the world, their philosophy. And, I think only total war can do it. And for those who say it can't be won, Ilan Cherno edited a book called Winning the Unwinnable War over a decade ago that gets into all this specifically. So it's that change of philosophy that needs to happen. And objectivists have written about how it can be done.
I want to get to our super chatters, but I just want to say about this idea. So the total war question was about what Israel should do in the north, right? Regarding Hezbollah. That is one of the most amazing things to me, because what Hezbollah is doing from the north and what the Palestinians are doing from the West Bank is exactly what Israel experienced from Gaza, with with slight variations, because it was more difficult to get from Gaza, into Israel, and it's exactly the same policy. It's, if they attack, we're gonna bomb some warehouse after we call them and tell them to get out of it, and that's it. And yeah, a few Hezbollah terrorists die here and there, but it is Israel not acting in the way it should, because presumably of what the world would say, and knowing that to get the international legitimacy to act, basically what they need is for an October 7th to happen from the north, then they can act in the north for an October 7th to act to happen from the West Bank, then they can act there. Unfortunately, that is, I think, what we're looking at.
I think the poll numbers though are surprisingly high. That I mean, so you have kind of Israelis thinking that they cannot achieve victory in Gaza, but on the other hand, you have I think the large portion of Israelis actually want total war in the north, which I think is a really positive and I don't know, even virtuous of the Israeli society that they're willing to go and fight. So I mean, I'm kind of torn about this survey. I think it's mixed.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean some of the numbers from the left, I think, are disturbing, and also the all right, we'll get to humanitarian aid in a few minutes.
Just say, in the midst of the Second World War, when like Japanese young men were going to go on suicide missions with kamikaze planes, like who would have thought that 10, 12 years later, you could have like a whole new generation of young Japanese that learned the lesson and that had completely different values and morals, and Japan became a huge, power and a generally benevolent country, certainly friend of the West. And, it seems so impossible now. And you think like, can this ever be solved? Like, will these young Palestinian men who are now engaged their whole life into fighting and terrorism and all these sinister acts, like could they or their children like actually be rational thinking, productive people? And it seems so absolutely impossible when you think about these atrocities. But again, I think it's like the power of philosophy, and it might take total war to change it. And maybe that's all could happen. But if their philosophy changes, their society will. That's the only thing that could stop the onslaught that's gone on for decades.
Morgan, and then we'll go to our super chatters.
I don't have maybe huge reflections about them, just that they didn't seem to reflect a huge degree of this sobering up phenomena amongst the left, as maybe I would have expected. There seems to be a bit too much of that, of the kind of anti-Israeli attitude maybe there still, but I don't have too much to say about it.
I have to say, I don't know if the people who were questioned in the poll have identified themselves as right. Maybe like, they were on the left and now they identify themselves as center or right even. So
sure,
we don't know. We don't know if they're still considering themselves left or something else.
All right, let's go to our super chatters. Thank you, Stephen, for the super chat. Thank you, Enric, for the super chat. Enric says, the current generation can change their views, but which ideas will the next generation see and adopt? Yes, and I think this is, I'm not sure if this is in reference, I'm guessing this is in reference to Israel, but yeah, the same is true elsewhere as well. And wherever you look, that's a major cause for concern. Thank you. How do I read your name? Schmack65, let's call it that. 51% of young Americans vote for Hamas rules, propose Israel's dissolution in a Harvard-Harris poll. Yes, we spoke about that poll a few months ago where 51%, actually support Hamas. Now, do these people have any idea what they're talking about? I don't know. It doesn't matter. You don't need to have fully thought the issue through before you're called up to hopefully at least do what that soldier did and just harm yourself, but potentially harm others as well. So, Jonathan, you didn't like that comment about the soldier. Do you want to comment about that quickly before we? All right. Thank you, Ginger, for the very generous super chat. Thank you, Christian, for the super chat. Christian says, in my understanding, the political divides in Israel are religious versus secular, doves versus hawks, against or for settlements in the West Bank, or unilateral disengagement. I think that pretty much sums it up. Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, it's very concrete bound. They don't talk about the big questions. So it's kind of like you're always chasing the next fire, or you're trying to put out the fire that's currently burning things, but they don't. It's like they don't try to think abstractly above that.
In principle,
or in principle, yeah.
Before we go to our next topic, I do want to mention that this Monday is the Daily Objective will be celebrating episode 1000 of the Daily Objective. That is Monday's episode. Now we are not going to do what we historically did, which is like a 3-hour show where, oh, Tuesday, sorry, Daniel, thank you. Which we usually do and tell everybody how great we are. But one thing we do have is a sponsor for that episode, and that sponsor, among other things that they are offering, is a $1,000 match, super chat match. But to get that super chat match, we have to have $1,000 in super chats, which I think we've only done once on this channel. Hopefully, we'll do that again if people, we're hopefully giving you enough time to plan, to do the financial planning until Tuesday, so you can take part in that. Now, the sponsor for that episode is the Silver Rose Bakery in Phoenix, and just to let you know, one of the perks is if you are the highest super chatter, you will get a box of some really good baked goods. I've had them, and I think also everybody who super chats $100 or more will get something from them. So yeah, make sure you tune into that live. And if you can and think you should, then of course we hope you will super chat. All right, now
Let me just say, I'm at the Silver Rose Baking website, and these cakes look off the effing chain. So you're going to want to tune in for that special and contribute.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I had them. I actually, I was in Phoenix. I got a box as a present, and I have to say, I went through that faster than you should go through a box of baked goods. But yeah, it was it's absolutely worth it. So I hope you join us for that. All right, so from that we will transition to. Yeah, that's the world we live in, and that's the content we create. We're transitioning into this incident yesterday. Now, what exactly happened there, I don't think anybody knows, but the media, it reminds me of this South Park episode where they kind of make fun of the global warming hysteria, and there's a dam that breaks, and they say. Yeah, we were reporting that over 60 billion people died, and there's been raping and looting, and then the news anchor asks, "Have you seen raping and looting?" And he says, "No, we're just reporting it." So uh, what happened yesterday is being reported, but nobody knows exactly. Humanitarian aid went in, people went after it. Some people there claim that the IDF started shooting at them. The IDF says that Palestinians came at the soldiers and the soldiers had to defend themselves. But yeah, the way it is reported is very much in line with how Palestinian propaganda works, which makes me really doubt the line that we hear from the news. Morgan, actually, I don't know if we all fully were aware that this topic is coming up. So sorry if I'm putting you on the spot with this, but Morgan, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I saw this on Twitter, and it was perhaps the usual caliber of discussions one might expect from Twitter. So there were people who were saying, look, here's the IDF, here's the proof that they're just there to murder people and to really go after blood. And then there were people who are from the more Israeli side who were posting the pictures of the kind of aerial footage from some kind of gunship, which was in the sky that the Israeli military released, where it showed hundreds of people swarming around what looked to be these trucks. And I couldn't establish an exact narrative of what was going on because the reporting was so polarized. Perhaps in the next few days we'll see it. But I could believe that the people were really trying to get after food and aid because there has been a lot of reporting about starvation setting in and all this kind of stuff, and that's what we'd expect to see at this kind of point of the war. As to whether if people were swarming the Israeli military and so on and so forth, this is a war. They have the right to defend themselves, and it's very threatening to have hundreds of people swarm on you. Now, I don't know what went on, and if there were things which were unjust, then I don't want to defend that, but it doesn't seem the reporting on it, which was coming from the typically pro-Palestinian side, was too much aligned with their typical prejudices. Here's the IDF going after blood. That's what struck me about it.
Yeah, I mean, like the notion that the IDF are these bloodthirsty killers, kind of like the Palestinians. Has there ever been any examples of this? I mean, has any military in the history of mankind ever been so cognizant of so-called civilians than the IDF in this example? I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, it's gone beyond even just dropping the leaflets. So this notion that, oh, well, here of course they're just gunning people going after an aid truck. It's just like reality doesn't comport with anything I've ever seen from the IDF. And Morgan, to your point, look, I don't think there should be aid at all. But if all of a sudden there's people swarming at you, some have weapons, there's guns going on. I mean, you're not there as a sacrifice. You are there to I hope, protect yourself more than anything. So I'm against aid, but if these soldiers, if these individuals feel threatened, I think they should shoot to kill.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. I mean, this whole discussion is just ridiculous. If after 4 months of, constant fighting in Gaza, and Gaza is being like devastated, buildings are destroyed, everything there is destroyed. It doesn't look like I mean, the IDF has basically took them back like 100 years back. And now this is like the big incident, like 100 Palestinians dead. And like, this is it. This is what you got. All the genocidal, screaming crowd. Is that the best that you can, conjure? I mean, this is just pathetic. I mean, I'm sorry, but 100 casualties in one day, even if that's true, it's probably not even true. But I mean, that's nothing. That's nothing. And I mean, Israel should do so much more. It's treating the Palestinians with silk gloves, and I mean, way too much caring for Palestinian lives, to the extent that it jeopardizes military objectives. So, I mean, and by the way, because we discussed the left, prior to this subject, and I saw yesterday someone on Facebook from the Israeli left, like just a comedian who's kind of well known in Israel. So he was like, okay, this is it. This is Israel's moment of a massacre. This has to stop now. We cannot continue. He was almost like glad that this happened. But I do want to say one thing, like in like a positive thing. So, because I'm really torn about, do Israelis, are they aiming for total victory? Are they kind of cynical and thinking, no, it cannot happen? But, you've had these protests of Israelis basically every day preventing these trucks of aid going into Gaza. And they've actually been successful. I mean, there were Israeli police that actually, they were pretty violent against them. And, many arrests, but they still keep going every day. And they're blocking with their, just their bodies, basically blocking the entry of these trucks, to the point that Israel or other countries like Jordan and whatever, the UN and whoever brings them aid, they had to parachute the aid into Gaza. So they don't even they don't use the truck. I mean, I don't know, maybe they still do the trucks, but they couldn't get the aid in, so they started parachuting aid from the air. And I mean, this shows you that Israel does this October 7th did change something, because you would not see demonstrations like this in the past. So, I mean, I think this is a really positive development.
Yeah, I mentioned in the past, like I'm not a fan of protests, whether certainly if you're on the wrong side of something, but even if you're on the right side, I don't think blocking the street is the way to get it across. I'm against that. This is the example. This is absolutely beautiful and well done to those people. They are true heroes. And yeah, unfortunately, back to this incident
By the way, we
yesterday.
should say they don't actually block, they're not, infringing rights of Israelis, because it's just literally like the aid going into Gaza.
Oh yeah,
It's
they're
not,
not
yeah,
protesting, in Tel Aviv in the middle
right.
of the road against humanitarian aid, which is a protest I would oppose because you don't have the right to block other people's way. But yeah, they're blocking that aid, and that's beautiful. Akira says there's no military more suicidal than the IDF. They protect everybody but their own people. I mean, that latter part is a bit much, but yes, you're right. They are absolutely suicidal, and that's the thing here. That for me, that's the story. What's unbelievable here is that Israel allows this aid in the first place. And why was the military there? They were there to protect the convoy because Palestinians are savages, not just when they break the fence and make it into Israel. They're savages when they're among themselves. And this was a way to make sure it would get to somewhere where the whole mob would stampede, and of course people died in the stampede. That's how that's what happens in stampedes. And yeah, Nathan, to your point, it's not a numbers game. It's not a numbers game, but there are people who should be killed in this war. Not enough of them are being killed. So yeah, anybody who when a soldier in Gaza, hopefully they have this is part of what they're told. When a soldier in Gaza sees a risk to his life, they should shoot to kill. Now, they weren't shooting to kill yesterday. They said we were shooting at, when we finally were in such a position, we were shooting at people's legs. No, don't shoot at people's legs. You know what these people did. And I mentioned earlier, did I mention this on the Daily Objective that I was watching the BBC? No, I think I mentioned it elsewhere. I was watching the BBC last night, and there's a report from Gaza, and they interview, these grown men who are crying about what was done to them, and nobody in the interview asks them, and I wouldn't expect the BBC to ask them, where were you on October 7th? What did you do? And there are two possible answers, which is participated or celebrated. Those are the two possibilities. So no, I have zero sympathy for any of these people, even if they're not Hamas. The fact is that they shouldn't be getting aid in the first place, and they should get shot at more.
Well, and I'll just jump in the fact that, to the super chat's point, the Israeli army is so altruistic and so self-sacrificial, and there's mandatory service in Israel, I think is one of the real black marks on the country writ large. I mean, certainly the draft is a terrible part of Israeli society. I mean, see Ayn Rand's influence on getting the draft eliminated here in the US. But, maybe if they were a truly vicious, lethal fighting force that knew how to eliminate an enemy and put its soldiers first, then you'd say, okay, the draft, I can live with it. But the fact that they're so self-sacrificial and they force people to come into that army, I think is a terrible, black mark on Israel's reality.
I just said, I was going to say, just if people, I guess, hear about the number of people who died and so on and are shocked by it, these kind of incidents aren't unheard of in war before, where there's a smaller number of soldiers who are overwhelmed by a crowd. And then what happens is the soldiers are so intimidated by the crowd who could just literally tear them apart. As if you look at the photos, it very easily could have happened. That they fire, and then the bullet will go through multiple people, and a lot of people will die. And there's a huge number of instances from that if you look at wars in history. Even just, I mean, not that I really want to compare them, but if you think of the Boston Massacre, it's a similar kind of phenomena. So it shouldn't really be surprising to people.
Yeah, and if you look at the Palestinians, we've mentioned the lynch in Ramallah in 2000. That was two Israeli reserve soldiers took a wrong turn, basically ended up in Ramallah, were arrested by the Palestinian police, the Palestinian authorities police, were taken, were held at the police station. Word got out, so the mob just came out and took over the police station, lynched the soldiers to death. And yeah, so that is not just wars in history, but it is the Palestinian people being true Palestinians. That is what is to be expected. I guarantee you, if they ever see an opportunity right now in Gaza to do something like that, of course they will take that opportunity. So yes, the soldiers, shouldn't be there in the first place. They should be there after aerial operation, but if they are, yeah,
I mean,
shoot more.
just think how sick it, seriously, just how sick it is that you have to fear the just random civilians more than you fear policemen of a hostile nation. So, I mean, yeah, that's terrible. I do want to just come in for Israel defense about altruism and self-sacrifice. I think after October 7, it is much less altruistic in the way that it's conducting its military operations. I mean, it's still too altruistic, in my opinion, and it could be a lot less and more egoistic, but there's no comparison with previous operations. Just no comparisons.
Akira Felix, who's one of our YouTube subscribers, it's not very expensive, maybe £5 a month. You get access to special content and a lot of great stuff. Also preferential treatment on the super chat. Akira said, imagine if Britain had provided Germany with water, electricity, and food. That's how smart Israel's been in this conflict.
Yeah, and to your point, Nathan, I agree. This military operation is much less than I'd like to see, but it's much more than before. And certainly, I mean, this is a bit anecdotal, but anybody I've spoken to who was in Gaza and so on, their approach is different from the Israeli government's approach. They do realize who they're dealing with, and they do as much as they can. And by the way, whenever I see these videos or images of soldiers in in a Palestinian home and using their stuff or whatever, I love it. I know not everybody agrees with me, and objectivists have disagreed with me on that. No, I think this is a part, humans are mind and body. There's a psychological aspect to this war, a psychological aspect which Hamas fights perfectly, and Israel should do more of that as well.
I agree with you there, Razi. I mean, these soldiers, they're not robots, and they're going in there, they're in Gaza for months, and it's a hellhole. I mean, it's just a hellhole. So if they can just have a little bit of fun at the expense of the people who, they have the moral responsibility of October 7th. So to hell with it. I mean, yeah, they should have
Right. And these
even
young
these.
men's and women's whole lives have been turned upside down. That's what's so heartbreaking is like these young people should be inventing stuff and working on Israeli technology and building things. But instead, because of Hamas and solely because of Hamas, they have to be, Natan, as you say, picking through the shit in this hellhole. So if they want to try on a few dresses or, throw around some antiquities, I say all the better.
I'm kind of, I don't know if I should read this, but Ram mentioned in the context of the lynch in Ramallah, they pulled their internal organs out with their bare hands. Yeah, and there's the famous image of that, which is, the guy holding his hands up and they're bloody, and and again, this goes back to why they do that. The imagery of it is a victory in their culture. That's why they live streamed themselves on October 7th. They could have just gone ahead. A lot of the things they did on October 7th were not, if your goal is to kill as many, which we know is their goal, that's not ideal. Like the person live streaming could do more killing. The raping, you could just kill. You don't take hostages, you could kill. But they know what victory means for them. Victory means for them to humiliate Israelis as much as they can, and of course with the hostages, it's also to ensure future terrorist attacks.
Yeah, just savagery. But maybe we can end on a positive note of the soldiers, because I think the Israeli soldiers are really the heroes here, and they're just, I mean, I just cannot express enough gratitude and appreciation of what they're doing in there, because I mean they're more they're more motivated to go in and finish the job than the politicians are, and they're the ones who are really just carrying the entire Israeli society right now and saying, come on, let's do it. I mean, and this is, but I have to say, this is right wingers, center, left, they're all in there, and they just want to go in until the end. And yeah, so I mean, that's a really positive thing.
Yeah, yeah, and when we say, when I say at least that this is not the military operation I would have liked to see. That is a government. That is my issue with the Israeli leadership. Absolutely not with the soldiers. We're doing amazing. They're risking their lives, and they are giving the Palestinians some of what they deserve.
Yeah, and I cannot confirm this, but there were reports of the like the politicians or the generals high up. They wanted to pull soldiers out, and the soldiers just said no, like we're not going out. So I don't know how true it is, but I've heard reports that suggested that.
That sounds likely. I mean, again, people I spoke to were motivated to go in. Some were disappointed that they couldn't, and yeah, um, it makes sense considering what October 7th was.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, guys?
Speaking of Israel, and as Natan said, the IDF over the weekend, and of course we've got more programming coming up this weekend as well, Razi, I know.
Yeah. So, Morgan, where can people find more of your work?
They can find me at Morgan Carter 98 on Twitter, where I've been having a go at Michael Knowles for his disgusting opinions about IVF, not related to Israel, but that's just what I've been focusing on. And then you can find my Substack linked in the description. There'll be an article that I've committed myself to coming out on Sunday, which is about multiculturalism and why it's subjectivist and against judging, and why that's important to changing a culture. So that'll be what's there.
Nathan, where can people find more of your work?
Google The Enlightened Examiner. You'll find me on Twitter, and I also have a Substack. My latest issue was about Israel, so maybe you'd find that interesting. And I'm planning to write about economics, so subscribe. It's free.
And Jonathan, where can people find more
My
from you?
book with Dr. Peikoff is Can You Really Love a Dog? And it's benevolent, it's heartwarming, and it presents a objectivist perspective on pet ownership. So it's at Amazon. Can You Really Love a Dog? Leonard Peikoff and Ayn Rand on pets.
I am at Razi Ginsburg on, what is it, Twitter, X, whatever it's called. And I do have, for our Israeli viewers, a new podcast with a friend of mine in Hebrew. First episode was earlier today. I didn't prepare Daniel for this, so I don't know if he has a link to put in the chat, but if not, we'll put it in the description. He does, so you'll see it. And in less than a minute, on our other channel, The Briefly Objective, there is a video premiering of Yaron Brook, Why the Left Hates the Jews. So make sure you go over to that channel, like it, subscribe to the channel, share that video. That's very shareable, short content for people who can't handle us for a whole hour. It's only a few minutes at a time. It is about to premiere. So thanks, guys. We'll see you back here Sunday for the reality show extra, and then Monday for the